But would it not have been a fine thing if I had put this money away for a rainy day? My work in Bridgeton attracted the attention of Sam Hudson, New Jersey correspondent of the Philadelphia Record, who was a shining example of that type of newspaperman whose greatest pleasure in life is doing things for others. Sam told me that it was time for me to get located in a big city. He thought I had it in me to make good. He said he could get me a job in Philadelphia. He did, and I moved with my wife and baby to Germantown. I was given charge of the advertising department of the Germantown, Philadelphia Gazette, a weekly newspaper. At the start, I did not make as much money as I had earned in Bridgeton because I had to give up my newspaper correspondence. The news for this section was covered by other correspondents, but very soon I was making 25% more money. The Gazette increased its size 3 times to accommodate its advertising, and each time I received a very substantial increase in salary. In addition to this, I was given a job to gather social news for the Sunday edition of the Philadelphia Press. Bradford Merrill, managing editor of that newspaper, now a very big important New York newspaper executive, assigned me a big territory to cover. This kept me busy every night in the week except Saturdays. I was paid $5 a column, but I averaged 7 columns every Sunday, which made me $35 a week extra. It was more money for me to spend, and I spent it. I did not know anything about budgeting my expenses. I just let it go as it came. I did not have time, or thought I hadn't, to watch my step in spending. A year later, I was invited to join the advertising staff of the Philadelphia Press, a big opportunity for a young man, for I got wonderful training under the management of William L. McLean, now the owner of the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. I still retained my job as gatherer of social news, so my income was just about the same as I had been making in Germantown. But before long, my work attracted the attention of James Elverson Sr., publisher of the old Saturday Night and Golden Days, who had just purchased the Philadelphia Inquirer. I was offered and accepted the advertising management of this newspaper. This meant a big increase in my income. And soon afterward there came a happy increase in my family, the birth of a daughter. Then I was able to do what I had longed to do since the birth of my son. I got the family together again under one roof, my wife and 2 babies, my mother and sister. At last I was able to relieve my mother of any cares or responsibilities, and never again did she have either as long as she lived. She died in her 81st year, 25 years after my father's death. I shall never forget her last words to me. "Will, you have never caused me a moment's worry since you were born, and I could not have had more than you have given me had I been the Queen of England." I was making at this time 4 times more money than my father had made as superintendent of public schools in my hometown of Phillipsburg, New Jersey. All the money, however, passed out of my pockets as easily as water flows through a sieve. Expenses increased with every increase in my income, which is the habit, I suppose, with most people. There was no sane reason, though, for letting my expenses go beyond my income, which I did. I found myself piling up debts, and from this time on I was never out of debt. I did not worry about my debts, though, for I thought I could pay them off at any time. It never occurred to me, not until fully 25 years later, that debt eventually would bring upon me not only great anxiety and unhappiness, but that I would lose friends and credit as well. But I must pat myself on the back for one thing. I was giving full rein to my big fault, spending money as fast as I made it, often faster, but I never shirked my work. I was always trying to find more things to do, and I always found them. I spent very little time with my family. I would go home to dinner every night and romp with the babies until their bedtime, then I would return to the office and often work. So the years went by. Another daughter arrived. Presently I wanted my daughters to have a pony and cart, and I wanted my son to have a riding horse. Then I thought I needed a team to take me around with the family, driving them to a closed coop or an open trap. I got them all. Instead of one horse and a carry-all, or perhaps a team, which would have been sufficient for our needs and something we could have afforded, I had to have a stable with all that goes with it. This outfit cost me nearly 1/4 of my annual income. Then I took up golf. This was in my 41st year. I went at my play the same as I went at my work, put my whole heart in it. I learned to play pretty well. My son and elder daughter played with me, and they learned to play well, too. It was necessary that my younger daughter should spend the winter in the South and summers in the Adirondacks. But instead of her mother going with her alone, I felt it would be fine if the son and other daughter went along with them. This arrangement was carried out. They went to Pinehurst, North Carolina every winter and to expensive resorts in the Adirondacks or in New Hampshire in the summer. All this took a great deal of money. My son and elder daughter were keen about golf and spent a lot of money on it. I also dispersed quite a little on golf courses around New York. Between the three of us we won 80 prizes, most of which are now in storage. I sat down one day and calculated what these prizes cost me. I discovered that each trophy had cost $250, or a total of $45,000 over a period of 15 years, an average of $3,000 a year. Ridiculous, wasn't it? I entertained lavishly at my home. Montclair folks thought I was a millionaire. I frequently invited groups of businessmen to have a day of golf at the club and then to have dinner with me in the eve. They would have been satisfied with a plain home dinner, but no, I must serve them an elaborate affair staged by a famous caterer. These dinners never cost less than $10 a plate, which did not include the money spent for music while they were dining. I had a Negro quartet come to the house. Our dining room comfortably seated 20 people, and it was filled to capacity many times. It was all very lovely, and I was glad to be their host. In fact, I was very happy over it. I never stopped to think how rapidly I was piling up debts. The day came when they began to bother me a lot. I had entertained so many guests at the golf club one month, paying for luncheons, cigars, and greens fees, that my bill was $450. This attracted the attention of the directors of the club, who were all good friends of mine and very much interested in my welfare. They made it their business to tell me that I was spending entirely too much money, and they wished for my sake that I could check my expenses. This gave me a bit of a jolt. It made me think seriously long enough to get rid of my horses and traps, at a big sacrifice, of course. I gave up our home and moved back to the city, but I did not leave any unpaid bills in Montclair. I borrowed the money to pay them. It was always easy for me to get all the money I wanted, despite my well-known financial shortcomings. Here are two sidelights on my experience during my flaring 40s. Besides spending money foolishly and perhaps recklessly, I loaned it with equal abandon. In cleaning out my house at home before moving to the city, I looked over a package of due bills, the total of which was over $40,000. That was money handed out to just about anybody who came along. I tore them all up, but I realized that if I had that money in hand, I wouldn't owe a dollar. One of the prosperous businessmen I had entertained many times and who in turn had entertained me said to me, "Billy, I've got to stop going on outings with you. You spend entirely too much money for me. I can't keep up with you." Think of that coming from a man who was making more money than I was. It should have struck home, but it didn't. I went on spending just the same and foolishly thinking that I was having a good time and with no thought of the future. This man is now one of the vice presidents of one of New York's greatest financial institutions and is reported to be worth many millions of dollars. I should have taken his advice. In the fall of 1908, after my disastrous experience of 6 months in another line of business following my resignation from the Hearst organization, I resumed newspaper work as advertising manager of the New York Evening Mail. I had known Henry L. Stoddard, editor and owner, back in the Philadelphia days when he was political correspondent for the press. Despite the fact that I was bothered by debts, I did the best work of my life on the Evening Mail and made more money during the 5 years I was associated with it than I have ever made before. Moreover, Mr. Stoddard gave me the privilege of syndicating advertising talks, which ran in his paper for 1,000 consecutive public days and earned for me more than $55,000. Mr. Stoddard was very generous in many other ways and frequently paid me special sums of money for doing what he considered unusual things in the way of developing business. During this period, I was so deeply in debt that in order to keep things moving as smoothly as possible, but without retrenching in the slightest way in my expenses, I borrowed money from Peter to pay Paul and from Paul to pay Peter. That item of $55,000 earned from syndicating advertising talks would have more than paid all my debts and left a nice nest egg besides. But all of it was spent as easily as though I hadn't a care in the world. In 1915, I went on my own in the advertising business. From that time until the spring of 1922, my fees ran into very big figures. I was still making more money than I ever did and was spending it just as fast as I made it, until finally my friends got tired of making me loans. If I had shown the slightest inclination to curb my expenses to the extent of only 10%, these wonderful men would have been willing to divide 50-50 with me, letting me pay them 5% of it and saving 5%. They did not care so much about the return of the money they had loaned me as that they wanted to see me pull myself together. The crash in my affairs came 5 years ago. Two friends who had stood by me loyally became impatient and told me frankly that I needed a drastic lesson. They gave it to me all right. I was forced into bankruptcy, which nearly broke my heart. I felt that every person I knew was pointing the finger of scorn at me. This was very foolish. While there was comment, it was not at all unfriendly. It was expressive of keen regret that a man who had attained so much prestige in his profession and had earned so much money should have allowed himself to get into financial difficulties. Proud and sensitive to the core, I felt the disgrace of bankruptcy so keenly that I decided to go to Florida, where I had once done a special piece of work for a client. It seemed to me to be the coming of El Dorado. I figured that maybe I could make sufficient money in a few years so that I could return to New York, not only with a competency, but with enough to pay all my debts in full. For a time it looked as though I would realize this ambition, but I was caught in the big real estate collapse. So here I am back in the old town where I once had big earning power and hundreds of friends and well-wishers. It has been a strange experience. One thing is certain, I have learned my lesson at last. I feel sure that opportunities will come my way to redeem myself, and that my earning power will be restored to me. And when that time comes, I know that I shall be able to live as well as I ever did on 40% of my income. Then I shall divide the remaining 60% into two parts, setting aside 30% to pay my creditors and 30% for insurance and savings. If I allowed myself to feel depressed over my past or filled my mind with worries, I would not be capable of carrying on the fight to redeem myself. Besides, I would be ungrateful to my Maker for having endowed me with wonderful health all my life. Is there any greater blessing? I would be ungrateful to the memory of my parents, whose splendid training has kept me anchored pretty safely to moral standards. Slipping from moral moorings is infinitely more serious in the end than slipping from the thrift standard. I would lack appreciation of the encouragement and support I have had in generous measure from hundreds of businessmen and to many good friends who helped me build a fine reputation in my profession. These memories are the sunshine of my life, and I shall use them to pave the way to my future achievement. With abundance of health, unfaltering faith, unflagging energy, unceasing optimism, and unbounded confidence that a man can win his fight, even though he commences late in life to realize the kind of fight he must make, is there anything but death to stop him?